'Cause like a winter tonight, I thought I would always have light. The quick flash that you gave to me, so dark I could barely see. Looking.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have a very special show today. We have with us General Daniel Bolger, and we're going to be exploring why we lost in Afghanistan and Iraq. General Daniel Bolger has commanded both in Afghanistan and Iraq. He's been in the military for 35 years and retired in June 2013 as a 3-star general. Welcome to the circle, General.
Thanks very much, Carlos. Glad to be here.
Well, you have a very fascinating book. It's starting to becoming more relevant these days as people are starting to see the unfortunate happenings over there in Iraq. In your book, you say why we lost in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that's what I wanted to explore with you. So I'll let you go ahead and start.
Well, I think the simplest thing, it's a complex subject, of course, but the war that started for our country on September 11th, 2001, it was a war that we started off very well. Sent our forces in Afghanistan less than a month after the 9/11 attacks and very successfully knocked out the Taliban government, put al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden's terrorist network, on the run. And as we know, it took about 10 years to get him personally, but everything was totally disrupted and screwed up for that terrorist network after our invasion of Afghanistan. Did very, very well there. And then in 2003, we did the same thing to Saddam Hussein in Iraq, who was another guy who had a lot of ties to terrorism, a longtime U.S. enemy, going back to the first Gulf War in 1990-91. Both of those invasions were very successful. But what followed in both countries was not successful for the United States. We tried pretty hard. We got great young men and women in our military who did outstanding and courageous work. But we employed them trying to put down popular insurgencies in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And what that's to say is that people didn't want outsiders running their country. They accepted that they'd been liberated and that we got rid of their oppressive governments under the Taliban and Saddam. But they didn't want us telling us how to run their country. And we sort of overstayed our welcome and ended up going village to village trying to figure out, which guy's a terrorist, which guy's a farmer. That's not really a good task for the U.S. military. Our great U.S. all-volunteer armed forces is trained and equipped to do short, rapid, decisive operations, go in, knock out a uniformed enemy military, people with tanks and jet fighters and submarines, and then pull out. We're not designed to stay for a long time. So a way to look at it is we're really good at doing things like Desert Storm, and we're not very good at doing things like Vietnam. And unfortunately, in this war, and guys like me are responsible. We should have known better. We backed us into 2 Vietnams.
That's not a good sign at all. We know how that ended.
Oh, poor.
Now, so it isn't the military. Is there any branch in the military that could have done what they wanted to do, or do we have to look elsewhere?
Well, I think the military can do it. What we got to do is watch out. We're like any other large organization. Sometimes we can be undone by our own success. We did such a great job in Desert Storm, in the Balkans in the 1990s, in various peacekeeping operations in places like Haiti. And then when we had that initial success in both Iraq and Afghanistan, we thought, man, this is great. The military's doing so well. We can really do one of these counterinsurgencies now, what escaped us in Vietnam. And in that regard, we sort of let our pride overdo us. And we trusted our great young people, but even they can't change the facts on the ground. And the facts on the ground are the people of Iraq and Afghanistan live there. And unless we're willing to go in and rule them as like the 51st and 52nd state, like the old British Raj in India or something, where we're the colonial overlords and we control their government and we stay forever, they're just not going to tolerate it. A couple years worth of Americans going house to house isn't going to change the fact that they don't like outsiders. And they wanted to arrange their own structure and their own government. And of course, in both countries, you had substantial groups, the Taliban in Afghanistan, the Sunni insurgents who are now called ISIS in Iraq, that were going to fight. They were going to take up arms and fight the outside invader, which they considered us to be. So they were happy with the initial liberation, but when we stayed, they weren't so happy.
How much of that impact do you think came from culture? I mean, there's a stark difference between American culture and the cultures in Afghanistan and Iraq.
I think quite a bit. And that's, again, where our sort of our arrogance, our over trust in ourselves and our own ability. And I blame myself as a general for this. We went in there and we thought, because our troops are so good, we can bridge these cultural gaps. And so just to give an example, Afghanistan is a country where 85% of the male adults cannot read and write, and almost 100% of the females can't read and write because the Taliban wouldn't let the women go to school.
85%?
Yeah, 85%. So you think about that. That means almost 9 out of every 10 people you meet cannot read or write. So you say, oh, we're gonna have voting. They don't know what voting is. You say we're going to poll you on what you think should be done in your country. They don't know what a pollster is. In fact, when we send pollsters around in Afghanistan, the people are very friendly. They have a cultural tradition of welcoming visitors. And so they welcome the pollsters, and the pollster says, well, we want to ask your opinion of the government of President Karzai and the American force that's here to help them. They would say, well, what do you want me to answer? Because they were trying to be polite. They didn't understand it was supposed to be their opinion. In some cases, some villages we went to in Afghanistan, they thought we were the Russians because that was the last group of outsiders they saw.
Oh, the Mujahideen days in the 80s.
Yeah. But they remembered a Russian military force coming in. So when we came in, the Russians are back. And we're like, we're not the Russians. As far as they were concerned, though, we weren't locals. And that was the big issue.
That's a big problem. So is it safe to say it was a naivete then?
Yeah, I think it was. Not doing our homework and not even looking at our own history. Heck, when I went to the War College, Carlos, I studied things like Vietnam. And we made some of the same errors there. We made some cultural assumptions about how the Vietnamese would react to American arrival. We actually had people who told us when we went into Iraq in 2003, they said, oh, the people will throw flowers at you. They'll welcome you as liberators, like when we came into France after D-Day in 1944. Nothing like that happened. And we shouldn't have been surprised by that because if we looked at the history of Iraq, the British had been in there after World War I. They'd had a rough time. There'd been revolts and things. Saddam had to use a lot of force to keep the people in line. I mean, he actually used chemical weapons on his own people. He would machine gun entire villages. I mean, if that's the way people are dealing with outsiders in their villages, it should tell you they don't want to be supervised by somebody who's not their tribal sheikh or their local elders. They don't want outsiders.
I don't blame them.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
I don't want to point fingers here, but I do want to try to see kind of how much of an impact they had on this whole project, I guess we'll call it, or the situation in Afghanistan and Iraq. But how much responsibility would you give, or how much of a percentage of participation would you give to the president, to the vice president, secretary of defense? Are these people that involved, or are they kind of really remote and they're not really aware of what's going on?
Well, a good way to say it is that the two presidential administrations that have had to deal with this war, the Bush administration, the Obama administration, they were engaged at times. Certainly, I mean, the Bush people were very engaged after the 9/11 attacks. I mean, tremendously engaged, put a lot of pressure on the military, I think correctly, to take a response and do something after those horrendous attacks that killed almost 3,000 civilians in our country. I mean, and the Obama administration as well at times has been very, very involved in this war. Certainly the raid to go get Osama bin Laden, where they found him in northwest Pakistan. I mean, the president was personally involved in approving that raid. But in general, the political guys give you sort of the right and left limits and what they hope to get out of the war. And then they leave it to the military to sort that out. You know, how is left to the military guys by and large.
Interesting to know.
And that, well, they'll occasionally intervene and say, oh, don't do this, do that. But you know, that's one thing I need to point out, because I think there's a tendency, a lot of times a retired general like me will say, well, by God, we would have won it except for those politicians. You heard that a lot after Vietnam. You hear it sometimes in this war. There's responsibility there, certainly under our Constitution. The president's commander-in-chief. Congress appropriates money for the military and makes rules as to how they carry out their operations. But it's the military guys who know how to win wars. And guys like me did not go into either President Bush or President Obama and say, hey, great job. We can do the initial invasion. We can knock out Saddam's military. We can knock out the Taliban with their tanks and everything at the front end of the war. What do you want us to do then? Do you want us to stay and try and make their countries into Jeffersonian democracies? Do you want us to go in, knock them out, and pull out like we did in 1991? Desert Storm, we didn't stay in Iraq. We went into southern Iraq, beat them all up, and then we pulled out. We didn't get that sorted out. And when we started to have these problems with insurgents and terrorists that were fighting us in the villages, we never sort of went back and engaged and say, well, how long do you want us to stay? Do you want us to stay 5 years, 10 years? Because the military reality is when you get into that kind of a war, if you don't convince the enemy, the insurgents, you're going to stay forever, they wait you out. And our own history tells us that. The British tried to control us during our Revolutionary War. And the British Army, the old Redcoats, they won most of the battles. I mean, we remember the ones that General Washington won, like Yorktown and Trenton. But there was a whole bunch of other ones, like Long Island and Brandywine and Philadelphia, where the British won those battles. Battle after battle, they beat us. Their one-loss record was like 99 out of 100 in that war. But it didn't matter because they didn't stay. They weren't willing to stay past 1783. They were 1775, 1783. They pulled pitch. They left. That's the same thing in Iraq and Afghanistan. There's a time limit as far as how long a country will stay. We military guys never sort of really laid out for the politicians just how long this thing could last if we stayed there. As a result, neither Bush nor Obama was willing to stay.
Should we have stated, I know some people are frustrated because they say, and I don't know if it's partisan politics or not, but some of them say, hey, look, we shouldn't tell anybody how long we're going to be there or when we're going to leave, because that's going to give these guys a reason to come right back and try to take over. We'll say Afghanistan at this point, was it too early for us to leave or to give them the insight that we were going to leave?
Yeah, I've heard that. But I would tell you that there's really two options. You can either leave early, right after the initial invasion. You come in, you knock out that bad government, the Saddam Hussein or the Taliban. You knock them out. You turn it over to local guys and say, do the best you can. We're on your side, but this is your country to sort out. And we have done that in places. That's what we did in 1991. We did it in Haiti in the mid-'90s, where we left it to the local people to sort it out. We didn't try and supervise their government. The other option is you say, okay, we're here for the long haul. We're here like we were in South Korea, where we still got troops from the war that had an armistice in 1953, or like in the occupation of Germany and Japan, where we still got troops there from the war that ended in 1945. And you set up a treaty and an arrangement and a long-term setup. But the big distinction there is whether you choose to leave right away or stay right away, you be real upfront about it. Why? Number one, for our own people, so that they're not surprised, because our own people, through their elected representatives, are going to decide whether they agree with that or not. A treaty must be ratified by the Senate, by 2/3 vote of the Senate. So if the American people don't want us to stay in these countries, they're going to make known to their senators, and the senators won't vote for the treaty. Alternatively, if the senators do vote for the treaty, guess what? We're in it. And that's why to this day, you don't see people marching in the street because we got troops in South Korea or Germany or Japan, because those were agreed to and, they were debated and then they were agreed to. Interestingly enough, both Iraq and Afghanistan, we have no treaty with those countries, either one of them.
Really?
The last thing we have, in the case of Afghanistan, we have an authorization for the use of force from 2001, right after 9/11. In the case of Iraq, we have authorization for use of force from October of 2002. Now, there's debate right now with this ISIS business about having another one. In fact, Secretary of State Kerry was just up in the Congress talking about they need to pass a new one. And I think he's exactly right, because the American people are very frustrated. They want somebody to be straight with them and say, hey, this is going to be over or this is not. Just tell them what the deal is.
That's a very complex issue. And I know in part two, we're going to talk about what's going on over there today. Before we get there, what do you think? How do you think we should have handled Afghanistan here?
I think the right answer, even though it would have been painful and frustrating, was go in, knock out the Taliban, mess up al-Qaeda to the extent you could, and then pull out and leave it to those guys to sort it out. I think once we stayed past that initial invasion, that's why the villagers thought we were the Russians. because the last guys who came and stayed were the Russians. And when they saw us, they said, hey, we knew you knocked out this bad regime in Kabul, the capital. Why are you still here? You know, they, like all people, they want to take charge of their own destiny. Yeah, they might want some help, you know, some assistance, some help with foreign aid money or whatever to help them dig wells or get their electrical system working. But they didn't want American soldiers going house to house, digging through their villages, trying to figure out where a terrorist is. They wanted to handle that. We did enough damage to Al-Qaeda initially that they were pretty well rocked back. You know, they were never able to mount another concerted assault. There's been other terrorist attacks, but it's not real Osama bin Laden Al-Qaeda. It's like a knockoff version of people trying to be like them, inspired by them. Yeah.
Actually, for my own selfish interest, why did it take us so long to catch bin Laden?
Couldn't find him.
Really?
It is very difficult to find people who don't want to be found, I can tell you. And he was real good. He was hiding in, as it turned out, he was hiding in a town in Pakistan, but that was just the last place he ended up. He had been in caves and all that. Bin Laden's background, he was a construction contractor. His dad ran one of the biggest construction firms in Saudi Arabia. They had rebuilt the holy sites at Mecca and all that kind of stuff. And so
wow.
Bin Laden, he actually knew how to drive bulldozers and all that stuff. I mean, he was a legitimate building contractor. And when the war with the Soviets started, he went over there to join the Great Holy War against the Soviets, and he built bases and tunnels for the Mujahideen, for the fighters against the Soviets. So when we attacked, he knew all of the tunnel complexes because him and his firm had built them. And they were on the Pakistan border, which is very mountainous. I mean, a horrendously mountainous area, real tough weather and all that kind of stuff. So he knew right where to hide. And he hid there while we were hunting for him, and then gradually snuck across the border, and then finally found this spot in this Pakistani town. And even there, his old building contractor tendency kicked in. If you ever look at that site, a very weird building, not very many windows, set up in such a way that he didn't have to come out for anything. He could send messengers out to get food and stuff. Definitely a guy who knew about construction.
That's fascinating. So it was very difficult, it sounds like, to try to find him at all.
Really tough. It took a lot of hard intel work. And I know it's a movie, people may say, oh, it's Hollywood. But from what I know, a lot of what's shown in Zero Dark 30 is at least a good suggestion of the long time it took to do the detective work to find that guy.
Well, thank you so much to General Bolger for being on the show. Thank you for that great insight. If you want to get his book, I'd highly recommend it, Why We Lost in Afghanistan and Iraq, if I remember saying correctly.
Yes.
If they want more information about you, where do they go?
Well, I think the best place to go is the Houghton Mifflin Harcourt Corporation. They got a wonderful website. They got my book and a bunch of other books on related subjects and a whole bunch of other things. But Houghton Mifflin Harcourt are the publishers of Why We Lost, and they've done a great job laying out what the book's about, and I think it make people interested.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Don't miss part 2. We're going to find out from General Bolger what's going on right now in this very complex area of the Middle East. See you next time, everyone.